And lets us finish Rejuvenation by Joy, Through Joy by Langston Hughes. Who knows how long all might have gone on splendidly with Lachey and Saul and their colony of joy, had not a most unhappy monster entered in to plague them. The monster that's in every man, wrote the Yale man later in his diary, the monster of jealousy, came to break down joy. For the various new ones became jealous of Lachey. "It's your fault," stormed Saul. "It's your fault. I told you to treat him all the same. I told you had to walk in the snow by moonlight, walk with your used-to-be wife, and leave the rest of those ladies alone. You know how women are. I told you not to start that private hour in the afternoon. I knew it would make trouble, create jealousy." For out of the private hour, devoted to the problem of each new one once a fortnight, where Lachey never advised, he couldn't, but merely received alone in confidence their troubles for contemplation, out of this private hour, ere long, howls, screams, and recriminations were heard to issue almost daily, and in late March, New Woman Althouse was known to have thrown an African mask at new leader, Lachey, because he kept her waiting a whole hour overtime while he devoted his attentions to the Meadowbrook heiress, New Woman Reeves. "My God," said Saul, "the house is buzzing with scandal. I heard it all from Van Culmer Jones." "These damn women," said Lachey. "I got to get rid of some of these women." "You can't," said Saul. "They've all paid." "Well, I will," said Lachey. "I'm tired. Why, even my divorced wife's in love with me again. Fire her, will you?" "Don't be foolish," said Saul. "She's a good secretary." "Well, I'm going to quit," said Lachey. "You can't," said Saul. "I got you under contract." "Oh, yeah?" said Lachey. "Too much is enough, and sometimes enough is too much. I'm tired, I tell you." They fell out, but Lachey didn't quit. It might have been better if he had, for spring that year was all too sudden and full of implications. The very earth seemed to moan with excess of joy. Life was just too much to bear alone. It needed to be shattered, its beauty given to others, taken in return, its eternal newness united. To the colony, Lachey was their leader, their life, and they wanted him, each one, alone. In desperation, he abolished the private hour, but that didn't help any. Mrs. Duveen Allhouse was desperately in love with him now. She called him Pan. Miss Joan Reeves could not turn her eyes away. He was her god. Mrs. Carlos Gleed insisted that he summer at her island place in Maine. Baroness Langstrand announced quite definitely she intended to marry him, whereupon Mrs. Althouse, who had thrown the mask, threatened without ceremony to wring at once the Baroness's neck. Several other new ones stopped speaking to each other over Lachey. Even the men members were taking sides for or against Lachey, or against each other. That dear soul, Van Culmer Jones, said he simply couldn't stand it anymore and left. In the city, the Broadway gossip columns got hold of it, this excitement over joy, and began to wisecrack. Then suddenly a minister started a crusade against the doings of the rich at the colony, and the tabloids sent men up to get pictures. Blackmailers scenting scandal began to blackmail. The righteous and the racketeers both sprang into action, and violets bloomed in April. Saul tore his hair. "We're ruined. Who cares?" said Lachey. "Let's go back to the Hollywood gym. We made plenty on this, and I've still got the Hispano Mrs. Hancock donated." "But we could have made millions." "We'll come back to it next year," said Lachey, "and get some fresh new ones. I'm damn tired of these new ones." And so they bickered. But the final fireworks were set off by Miss Tulane Lucas, the dusky female of the Primitives. They began over the earth drummer, and really had nothing to do with the colony, but fire, once started, often spreads beyond control. The drummer belonged to Miss Lucas, but when spring came, he got a bad habit of driving down to New York after work every night and not getting back till morning. "Another woman," said Tulane to herself, "after all I've done." She warned him, but he paid her no mind. One April morning, just in time to play for the 11 o'clock lecture, with Lachey already on the platform, the little colored drummer arrived late and, without even having gone by the cottage to greet Tulane, rushed into the palm court and took his place at the earth drums. "Oh, no," said Tulane, suddenly from among the palms, while all the new ones, contemplating on their African stools, stared at the unwanted sound. or started at the unwanted sound. "Oh, no, you don't," she said. "You have drummed for your last time," and she took a pistol from her bosom and shot. Bang! 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 Screams rent the palm court as the drummer fled. Bang! A bullet hit somewhere near his life center, but he kept on. Pandemonium broke out. "My God," said Saul. "Somebody grab that gun." But Mrs. Duveen Althouse beat him to it. From Delane, she snatched the weapon for herself and approached the great Lachey. "How right to shoot the one you love," she cried. "How primitive, how just," and she pointed the gun directly at their dear leader. Again, shots rang out. One struck the brass curve of the brass horn, glanced upward toward the ceiling, and crashed through the glass of the sun court, showering slivers on everybody. But by that time, Baroness Langstrom had thrown herself at Duveen Althouse. "Oh!" she screamed. "You wretch! Shooting the man I love!" Her fingers sought the other's hair. Her nails tore at her eyes. Meanwhile, Mrs. Carlos Cleed threw an African stool. Mrs. Althouse fired once more, but Lachey had gone. The final bullet hit only the marble floor, flew upward through the piano, and sounded a futile chord. By this time, Saul had grabbed the gun. The screams died. Somebody separated the two women. Little French maids came running with water for the fainting. Happy Lane emerged from behind the bass viol, pale as an African ghost, but nobody knew where the rest of the jazz band had disappeared, nor Lachey either. They were long gone. There was no lecture that morning. Indeed, there were never any more lectures. That was the end of the Colony of Joy. The newspapers laughed about it for weeks, published pictures and names of the wealthy inmates. The columnists' wives cracked. It was all very terrible. As a final touch, one of the tabloids claimed to have discovered that Lachey was a Negro passing for white. And that is the end of that story.